Eric, welcome to the podcast. We have got a podcast full of Erics today. I'm Eric, you're Eric, and your fellow co-founder is Eric as well. So we're not short on the Eric departments. To give a brief introduction of you, Eric Karjaluoto. I know it's Swedish and super hard to pronounce, but you are one of the two co-founders of Campnab, an app that helps you get a campsite. And looking at your past history, you've got it looks like quite a legacy of founding companies. How are you doing?
I'm good. I don't know if you could say that I guess founded companies is somewhat accurate. I think a more probably honest kind of summary of that would be we've started a couple of companies and tried out a lot of products that haven't worked out very well. So we've tried a lot of things and messed up a lot of things. That might be a better LinkedIn profile headline, but probably wouldn't work as well in other settings, I suppose. So yeah, I don't know if many people will be excited to hear that. You failed a lot of things. Great, So.
Well, I got the recommendation earlier in my career that regarding LinkedIn is that if you want a history lesson, you should go to Wikipedia, which has its own problems. And if you want to get a job, you go to LinkedIn. So you definitely want to frame things in the best light.
Yeah, exactly.
And as they say, life is the best teacher. So it sounds like you have had the opportunity to learn quite a bit.
Yeah, and like it's funny, like I make fun of ourselves for the things we've gotten wrong. But I think that's part of building products is that like a few years ago, this term failing fast became very popular. And I'm not sure I love that idea because it almost makes it feel better or more okay that you're making a mess of things sometimes. But I think if you're making mistakes and learning and kind of moving forward, I think that's pretty normal, actually. Like most folks I know who do things like this get pretty used to the fact that the batting average isn't as high as you might want it to be in your dreams. So,
well, I'm excited to hear about the growth and the failures along the way. That's near and dear to my heart as I kind of have came up the analyst tech path and am now starting my own company. And I'm finding that failing is perhaps routine, for lack of a better word for it. But now, would you mind telling us what is Campnab and how did this idea start?
Yeah, Camp is really simple. It just notifies people about available campsites. So people tend to overbook reservations or their plans change. And when they do, they cancel their campsite reservation. And there are a lot of people who want those reservations. So they just come to our site and tell us when they'd like to camp. And our system just kind of programmatically monitors that campground to see when something suitable opens up. And it sends them an alert when it does. If we're talking failures, this is an idea that I didn't think would work at the outset. My business partner, we'd been working together for, I think, like 17 years at the time. We've been friends for like decades. I've known his wife since the 9th grade. They just got a camper van. Nothing was available in BC. So she just went and hit the refresh button on the BC Parks website repeatedly and eventually found a cancellation. And the other Eric was clever enough to go, hey, I could automate this and it'd be a lot easier for you. And we went over for a barbecue one night and he said, I'd be doing this for my wife. I think other people would probably like this. And I said, yeah, it seems like a neat idea, but I don't know if anyone's really going to care. But the thinking in my head was that so many of my ideas hadn't worked out that I thought it was about time for him to get a chance. And if his idea didn't work out, that was kind of cool. And it turned out, people wanted this pretty much instantly. And over the years, it just became our full-time job. I never would have thought this was the one that would have been at no point in my life did I think I would know as much as I know about canceled campsite reservations. That was never on the career path at any point, so.
Well, it's a rather obscure topic to be sure, but What strikes me from an outsider looking in, and kind of being in the outdoor industry, is I would imagine that there's largely two groups of people here. A very small group of perhaps seasoned campers that know how in demand some of these campsites are, and a
Yeah.
large majority of perhaps more recreational campers that are aloof until they go to book one of these
I
campsites. Is
think
that what you've seen from the
I
data?
think so. Yeah, yeah. There are some folks who just understand that getting into Yosemite is going to be probably similar to getting Taylor Swift tickets. Like I think there are those people who know that there's super high demand for certain parks. There are a lot of people who camped once with their parents or camped growing up, who are maybe, if they grew up at the same time I did, in the 70s and 80s, when you could kind of drive up to a campground and maybe just set up right away. And for those people, I think there's a lot of frustration. Like, how can it be this hard to sleep on the ground? And it's kind of, I think, trying to get folks to recalibrate their understanding of how many people want to be in the outdoors. Like that's changed a lot. Like when I was a kid, all of the things my family did, you know, cross country skiing, roller skiing, dryland training, all were kind of things that I would be made fun of. Like nobody did that stuff. Wearing spandex, roller skiing down the road with my dad, people thought that was really, really weird. But a lot of these things have become pretty mainstream, and camping is one of those things that a lot of people want to do either from a nostalgia standpoint or just because they want to get away from their computer screens. And our population has gone up an awful lot since the 1970s, and that just means the number of campsites that are out there really haven't increased a great deal. Those don't bump up at the rate that the population does. So yeah, there's a bit of disappointment for those folks, and like I said, recalibration to go, oh, camping isn't what it might have been at one point, especially if you're by a really densely populated area. That certainly impacts things greatly.
That very much parallels my experience from growing up, where you could more or less roll up, no reservation, no prior contact, and find a campsite. And that being said, I grew up in California, and I'm currently located in LA. And I know you mentioned on your website California and Florida kind of as specific oddities given the rampant demand. I've actually never heard that about Florida, which is interesting. I guess presumably they've got the demand is drastically outweighing the supply as well.
It is. I think what Florida has also, and I think Arizona, are snowbirds. So people in colder climates who are going to escape the winter months, especially retirees. There are some beautiful parks in those areas, so there's a lot of demand on that level. And you've also seen a kind of bump in. It's funny, like if you look at things like van life and the demand for RVs and this sort of thing. And I think remote work as well has fueled a lot of this, where folks are deciding that they want to go and travel more, and maybe they're doing that earlier in life through remote work, or maybe they're doing it, doing an early retirement and downsizing and putting more of their money into some kind of a motorhome or what have you. But I think you're just seeing a real spike in that kind of activity throughout North America, and I'd probably gather worldwide. So it's just these. Sorry, I'm nattering on a bit, but I think there are a lot of things that have happened at the same time. Be they change in terms of ideas of what RVing is like, to nostalgia, to pandemic limiting international travel. All of these things have affected the amount of demand that there is on available camping opportunities.
Well, I was going to ask that as well. Have you seen, first of all, when did Campnab start? And then have you seen an increase since COVID in terms of the interest in the outdoors?
So Camp started in 2017. I think it was around May or June of 2017. I think, yes, there certainly was a pandemic bump. we had an interesting year where we managed to eat through 2008 with our main company, and that was a scary time, right? Like nobody was buying design services, which is what we're selling at the time. So when the pandemic hit, there was a certain amount of trepidation, and we saw like a lot of people cancel their memberships, which was a bit nail biting for us because we just finally gone full time on Camp Neb, and I'm like, maybe we should have held on to those design contracts. So there was about a kind of a 1 to 2 month lull where everything got kind of spooky. Then domestic travel opened up enough. It went from us all being inside and not even walking around our neighborhoods to, okay, you can travel, but not too far from home. And at that point, we saw a big uptick in the number of people who signed up. But I don't think that is the only thing driving it. I think if you really look back, I think we've seen movement in this probably over the past 10 to 15 years. I think I attribute a lot of it to how we work now, where many of us are working on computers all day. We're seated. We're looking at screens. I can't wait to never look at a screen again in my life like that. Like it used to be a treat to get on a computer as a kid. That was so much fun. And now I think I've seen enough screens for a lifetime, and I don't think I'm alone in that feeling.
Well, much of that definitely parallels my own experience. I've got real good friends with young kids, and they are very conscientious of how much screen time they give them. And I was talking to the husband, my friend, and I said, do you realize how much screen time you and I do every day?
Yeah.
And it's
Totally.
excessive. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have a way around it, right? Like it's your job, but then additionally, when you turn it off, like because so many of our social connections as well are through that, and the expectation that we respond quickly to people when they text us or what have you, it almost feels like you're missing a limb when you don't have a screen at hand. And I know that's somewhat necessary, but I don't find it all that pleasant. I'd love to kind of remove that from my life at some point. So
is that one of the big reasons that you've been, it sounds like a lifelong outdoor enthusiast, just the ability to separate?
Like, I wish I could say that I've been a lifelong outdoor enthusiast. The truth of the matter is, I grew up really wanting to be a good Nordic skier. My dad was a really strong and is still quite a strong Nordic skier. Even at almost 80, he's still going pretty hard at that. By about 16, I realized that I didn't have the motor for that, and there were kids who were just really good at it, and I was not very good at it. And I started to get really interested in art, so I went to art school. And at that point, I had kind of done my fill of the outdoors, but it was something I grew up with. So my parents took us up camping a lot. I went to a lot of Nordic races with my dad. We did a bunch of stuff in the backcountry, mountain biking, going for hikes, that sort of thing. So I lived in the country, so we had access to a provincial park within walking distance of my home. So I grew up with all of that, and I was sick of it by about 16 or 17. And so when I moved away, I didn't want to sleep on the ground. I wanted a flush toilet. All of that was really important to me. I didn't want to smell of campfire smoke. It was once we had kids and I'd spent a lot of time in front of a computer that I went back to Nordic skiing, mostly to bring my kids into it. And I'm kind of surprised by how much more I love it now than I did as a kid. Like it's one of my favorite things. I live in Vancouver, where there's a lot of mountain biking, a lot of access to the mountains. So really it's something that kind of has grown over my late 30s and 40s. And now my entire retirement plan is effectively to live in a camper van and travel around. That's what I kind of want to do. So, I had that gap in there where I didn't do any of this stuff, and maybe that's enhanced my appreciation of it. I also think I just loathe crowds so much that I'm not a city guy at all anymore. I want to go where there are no human beings most of the time. That makes me quite happy. So
I love it. I love it. Well, the outdoors is a great place to be secluded, if you
oh,
will.
yeah, and
Now,
especially up
yeah,
here, as it is like Vancouver is certainly more densely populated, but as you travel a few hours out, you can really be quite remote, which is, yeah, it is kind of spectacular to be on a, you know, last summer I was on a sandy beach that felt like we were in the tropics, and there was no one around on a canoeing backcountry trip that we went on. And I'll never forget that. And my kids will never forget that. Those are wonderful experiences.
the more and more I have these podcasts and get to talk to, outdoor adventurers such as yourself, I find there are two things that kind of jump to mind. Number one, when people are telling kind of their stories and their past adventures. Number one is kind of who they're with. It seems really special and a real big part of it. And actually the second part is when the adventures don't go well, they tend to leave a better imprint in you over time.
Isn't that like they call it type 2 fun? I think those are the ones that are, yeah, like it's funny. Like I went on a mountain biking trip with my dad back and another couple of folks we knew who were really active outdoors people. Like they'd gone everywhere. And it was such a funny trip because when it was up near Smithers, BC, which is kind of going west interior of British Columbia, sort of long bike ride in. This was pre-suspension. Mountain bikes were pretty primitive. They were very early on. Beautiful ride in, and this wonderful night watching the sunset from the mountains in the Alpine, just perfect. And that night, I remember being asleep, and I couldn't figure out why someone was flipping a light bulb in front of my face all the time, like why the lights were flipping off and on. I was just in such deep sleep that I didn't realize it was a lightning storm. And we woke up the next morning to like one of the worst storms of my life, everything clouded in. The people we were with, their tent failed and had a river flowing through it effectively. My dad was very frugal with gear at the time, so he picked up it was rain gear. It was basically like plastic bag of rain gear. So riding down, all the rain gear tore as we were coming down, and then a camera was lost up top but wasn't. And by the end we were coming through, like we had to wade through rivers or streams that had overflowed that were kind of mid-thigh height. I'm really sick after this trip. But it's funny when I see the photos of that. I know this is a long-winded story, but when I see the photos of that trip,
Please.
Probably one of the best experiences with my dad, and a story that we can both look at and go, man, like that was a really crummy trip on a lot of levels, but you'll never forget it, right? Like those are the ones that seem to stick with you. So again, I'm sorry I went on such a tangent, but that was over 30 years ago, and it's etched in my head. It wouldn't have been if we hadn't had such a crummy way down. So,
no, that's a fantastic story, and I to echo on that is I find that oftentimes it's the stories when the weather comes in, and specifically where to set up your tent. I know it sounds like that one just failed, but I find, as I think most people, when you finally get to the campsite, whether it's car camping or backpacking, you're just tired and you tend to throw it up at the first available spot, which is not always the best decision. So,
yeah, it's funny. I sleep so well. Like I'm out in about a minute every night. But what I've learned lately is that my back, I think this must be an aging thing. My back, if the surface isn't reasonably level, is just in such agony by 3 a.m. And so I've become very particular. Like, I don't mind if I'm on an angle where my feet are slightly lower, but if my body is rotated at even a slight degree, man, those nights can be really painful. Like, it just doesn't. I ended up on our last trip at 3 a.m. reading under the moonlight with a headlamp on, because I just couldn't sleep any longer. So yeah, I feel you. I'm pretty particular about how we set up the sleep arrangements, and especially in the backcountry.
Now, I'm just going to stay on this topic. I'm
Cool.
curious to know, given that you're so particular about your sleep setup, do you use an air pad or are you using a foam sleeping pad?
So we have a bit of a mix. We have, for the backcountry, I don't recall the brand right now. It's the main air mattress brand. I think it's a Thermarest Neo Air or something like that. It's not the really crinkly one. And it's not, I know the crinkly one is super light, but people say it's like deafening to sleep with. Um, I'm going to have to upgrade that because it's just not working.
Sure.
Um, for
Sorry to cut you off there. I want you to know every single backpacker that I've had on has raised the concern of the crinkly Neo Air. It is ubiquitous across the industry.
Yeah, it's funny. There are like how much time I've spent trying to dial in our gear, and for the backcountry stuff, like we don't do a ton of it. So there's been a lot of education for me around trying to get the cook set up just right, and also factoring into there four of us. How we set all of that up, but that one has come up a lot. For car camping, we have a couple of rooftop tents. One of them is on top of the pickup. That's really quite comfortable. It's a Go Fast camper. They have they had one called the Super Light, which we could get small enough to fit into our garage, which being in the city, we need to get everything underground. So yeah, that's been quite good. And then we have a second rooftop tent on top of our trailer sauna. My dad actually built a sauna for us in a trailer, which we take on all of our camping trips. So we sleep on top of that. The kids sleep in the one on top of the truck. Those have worked out quite well because again, you're on a pretty even surface, and you can level up both the truck and the trailer to be pretty level.
Yeah, you can always tweak your gear, right? And I
Totally.
do what I do want to point out to our viewers who are just listening to this. Eric has got an Arc'teryx jacket on, and
Right.
the reason why I point this out is that I've noticed that every Canadian that I've had on the podcast is wearing Arc'teryx gear. Is it just everywhere up there?
It's Vancouver in particular. A lot of people wear it, and I think it's because they are a local company. Like they originated here. There are a couple of they function quite well. Like the cut in the garments is really good. Like the ski pants is like an articulated knee, so they're kind of wonderful when you're skiing because you're not feeling that kind of pull on the knee that you would with a lot of other garments. We also have done some design work for them through our design studio, so I've had a good experience with them there. They also have their factory outlet just over the bridge from where I live, so you know, shirts like this one were they were bought at a really affordable price because I didn't mind that it was off season or the wrong color or whatever. So
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
so we kind of drive up sometimes on our way into the mountains and just go like, there's anything that's on a really good sale, let's pick that up. So I think that's worked out well also with location.
Well, I think I'm the same way. Whenever I have the chance to pick up a piece of Arc'teryx gear, I always do so. And I would want to say for the record, I am in no way sponsored. I would love to be, so if anybody's
Yeah,
listening out there, as we all would be probably,
yeah,
because I think I would make the argument, I would be hard pressed. And it's interesting to hear that you've been on the design side, that I would argue that it'd be pretty hard to come up with a name of a company that, in terms of that kind of beats Arc'teryx in terms of design and performance. Now, I
yeah,
will say on the cost side, that's not always the best ratio right there.
totally. Yeah, and just to be totally clear, where I was involved in design was as an external consultant looking at brand related, like design direction-y kind of stuff, not on the product end. I'm not a product designer in terms of like a garment designer. That's not my expertise whatsoever. So it was really a pretty small role I played there. It was kind of a short gig coming in, but yeah, like in terms of that company's focus on building products that function well, I think they're remarkable. The ethics of Patagonia and like, I just bought a new jacket for my son, and I ended up going to Patagonia in part because the price was much more agreeable, but also the jacket we ended up buying him was made from recycled fishnets, which was just awesome. So I think like reading Yvon Chouinard's book and looking at some of the moves they've made to really build. I recognize that part of it's probably PR, and it's PR that served them very well, but it really does seem that they've invested heavily in trying to build products that have the planet in mind, and I really admire that a lot as well.
Likewise, and absolutely, you know, there are definitely PR advantages to what they do, but I would make the argument their track record of doing this is so long that it's hard to say it's anything but authentic and, you know, motivated by a passion for preserving the planet and the outdoors. Now, I do want to let me swing us back to Camp Nab a little bit here, because I am excited to pick your brain and to just understand it a little bit better. Now, do you find that Camp Nab is best used? I know we've talked about kind of the increased demand overall, but I guess historically, I know you cited a site like Yosemite, or I'm thinking of my own, you know, maybe home territory. There's some campsites in Joshua Tree, the climbing destination, that always book up months in advance. Now, do you find that it's a product that is best used for those campsites, those extremely popular, legendary campsites, or that it's useful across the board?
It's pretty useful across the board, but again, within reason. So, you know, if you're looking at, let's say, camping in northern BC, it's going to be less of an issue because there's not quite as much demand. If you're going to the Yukon, let's say, I believe most of the campgrounds in the Yukon are issued on a first come, first serve basis. So, you know, there are, I believe there's at least one state in the United States that only has first come, first serve reservations. So there are going to be places where it's just useless entirely. Places like Yosemite are in extremely high demand. San Elijo, Bahia Honda. There are a number of these parks that we see. I kind of have like my top 5 of ones that keep coming up over and over again. State beaches in California tend to be quite tough, but it's not that different everywhere else. It just might not be to the same extreme. So from Vancouver, if you want to camp at Porto Cove, it's going to be in, I would say, almost as much demand as one of the California state beaches. It's a oceanfront campground. It's 30 minutes from Vancouver. There are only like 40, 50 campsites at the whole place. There are 3 million people almost in the Lower Mainland. Those areas are going to be under a lot of demand as well. But really, sorry, I'm probably getting too specific about individual parks, but almost universally, there's demand for camping. There are times where it's, sorry, this isn't what you asked, but I will just throw it. Off-season and midweek tend to be a lot easier in everywhere, but I think you're going to be hard-pressed to find a campground that isn't busy for, let's say, the July 4th long weekend. Like, those are universally going to be pretty booked up. So, yeah, in any of those spots, you're going to find that some amount of campsites are going to be canceled. The reservations are going to be canceled. And then a product like ours just becomes a convenience because you're not having to manually hit refresh on that park site all day long.
Right, exactly. No, that's a great perspective, and I also like the call out that the off season and midweek tend to be less competitive, although still very competitive. That being said, I imagine virtually most of us, right, you and I are working all week, and so when do we have the opportunity to go camping is exactly when everybody else has the opportunity to go camping.
Yeah, but you know, like, sometimes, like, especially if you are working from home, if you're a little bit flexible. Like, for me, the challenge is I will be doing support for Campnab from the campground, which honestly kind of doesn't make for the funnest camping trips because I'm sitting sometimes in my truck with my Wii Boost on, and we're just on the edge of cell access, and I'm trying to get a message through. That's not always the most fun, but I think being creative with your time, it's a lot like skiing. My son really wants to go downhill skiing. Today was a long weekend. It's a powder day. I knew that we weren't going to get up there. We're just not going to go. But if we pick any of the weekday and head out at about 2:00, if I can just get him off school an hour early and we can zip out, it's not so bad. So I think a lot of it is that, can you be somewhat flexible and maybe work the weekend, because you do open up an awful lot of opportunities throughout those weekdays.
Well, I think that that's a great image, though, really on point with the brand, to know that, if I go to Camp Nab, that you're towards the weekend, or that you might be in your truck working away. So I think it's very very authentic to the Camp brand, Camp Nab image.
We're a very homegrown kind of company. There's no call center answering the calls. It is literally Eric and I who are responding to every customer who reaches out.
I love it. Now, I saw that you've made this excellent frequently asked questions, and have made various YouTube videos, but I did want to sort of bring maybe what I saw as one of the most concerning. I did want to ask that to you and give you a chance to talk through it, and that way help maybe clarify the product. It
Sure.
seems like a lot of people are asking and wondering, is Campnab scalping campsites?
Yeah. Yeah. The simple answer is no, it doesn't. We don't. For a couple of reasons. Number one, people would want to hurt us if we did. Sorry, I have to cough for a second. Sorry about that. I just had that tickle in the throat that wasn't going to go away. Yeah, and so what Catnab is incredibly simple. It's looking for when a campsite switches from unavailable to available, and then it sends out a notification. That's it. I think there's a lot of fear that someone is going out and scooping up all of the campsite reservations and reselling them at a profit. I've done a lot of research into this. I don't see any evidence of it. We're not the kind of people who want to go and do something crummy, nor do we want everyone hating us. So we're certainly never going to be booking campsites for people, and we think that would be pretty unfair. I know there's some folks who even think that what we do is unfair. There's that argument of like, should you be notifying some people? Don't they then get an advantage because they're paying you to do that? And I don't think that's an unreasonable kind of position to come from. The reality of it is that it's so incredibly impractical to have to sit and hit refresh on a parks booking system day in and day out. Like, it's just a really poor use of time. And so we charge starting fees of $10 a month to use our service, which is about the same as a load of firewood, like a very small bundle of firewood. It's not a lot. That helps for us to keep, working on this and building the product. A lot of people only use it for a month at a time as they need it, and they cancel. And keep in mind that a lot of booking systems actually have this function. Words are escaping me. A lot of booking systems have this functionality built into them. So you could just check your park site and see if they have a notifications system built in. And if they do, you can use that without even paying for our service. Not all of them do have that. Some of them are going to work better. Some of them are not going to have the functionality that ours has, but we're not the only way you can do this. And so I kind of look at it that if the people at the booking systems and at the parks are enabling this sort of functionality, it's something that probably is going to become increasingly universal for campsite booking.
Now, help me understand the whole process here. So let's say, and I'm going to pick Joshua Tree just because that's I grew up kind of dashing out to the weekend to do a rock climbing weekend, if you will. Yeah. Their main campsite, which and now I feel embarrassed, but then the name is escaping me. I want to say Hidden Valley, but that might be up in the Sierras as well. Now, their campsites will be released kind of so many days or so many months in advance on a rolling basis, correct? Is the
It depends on the booking system.
Okay.
Every booking system approaches it differently. I think Joshua Tree would be managed through recreation.gov, and typically they're on a 5-month booking window, 5-month rolling window. And I believe the way they do it is that on the 15th of the month, you're booking for 5 months out, and that's for the entire month following that. So right now, I think with Yosemite, I saw for Upper Pines, Lower Pines, and North Pines, you were booking currently for June 15th through to July 14th as of today. And today is, or 2 days ago, and we're at middle of February. So, but again, that's going to vary even. Sorry, I know you're asking Joshua Tree. It's
Sure.
It's in my
even
head.
better. We could stick on Yosemite. Yeah, go for
No,
it.
we can go back to Joshua Tree.
Sure,
But just for the record, it was if you look at there are so many different campgrounds in that park, and a lot of them are on a slightly different system. There are also permits. Sometimes there are lotteries in place. These often change from year to year as well. The state is going to handle these things differently from the federal, like anything under federal jurisdiction. So you are going to see some variety. So sorry, again, way more detail than you probably wanted, but with Joshua Tree, I believe that's what you're seeing is a 5-month rolling window that opens up the 5 months out, basically. So,
No, absolutely, and I'm really excited to jump into the complexity and nuance. I do want to just make sure that so when these campsites at Joshua Tree open up, it's a mad frenzy, if you will, to grab it, and they often quote unquote sell out or book up. I mean, I don't know. I've seen within minutes of it going live or in that regard.
Yeah.
And where Campnab jumps in is after it's been booked. Once I've lost out on my Joshua Tree trip, I can then set an alert through your website in the event that somebody cancels, which happens pretty frequently, is my understanding, just from a qualitative observation. Just because, like, for example, I know it's so competitive, I might grab a campsite and then later go to friends and say, hey, are you free that weekend? Is that a good like overview of sort of like the customer journey?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think something that you've alluded to that's really important for folks to know is that we don't help at all on opening morning. You shouldn't use Campnab to try to get a site on opening morning, because we're not going to book the site for you. We're not going to hold it for you. We don't resell anything. All we're doing is looking for a change in status on a campsite. And so because scans run at a frequency, odds are that what's going to happen is, let's say our scan runs at 7:59, and the campsites are released at 8 o'clock. By the time the next scan runs, all of it's going to be booked. So there's no advantage on opening morning. Sorry, I'm using 8 a.m., but I believe in California for national, it's 7 a.m. By 7:01, at a lot of those parks, everything will be booked already. And they're going to do exactly what you're doing, is folks are going to go, get me anything. And we'll, if you're thinking 5 months out, you kind of have to grab anything you can get and then just change your plans as you come to it. So, or as those dates approach. So yeah, it's, I think that's our Amazon delivery because the dog's going nuts.
Perfect timing.
Yeah. So we'll give him a moment. He should calm down there. There we go. Yeah, sorry. That was kind of a multi-piece question, but yes, opening morning, we're of no utility. It's after the fact. And yes, people are booking more than they need, and in part because they feel that they have no other option, and then their plans change over time. That when the plans change is when Catnab becomes useful, but not really before that.
And then you brought up well, first of all, that's a great, thank you for kind of filling that in those gaps, and kind of framing this whole ecosystem, which is as you're kind of explaining, really complex and kind of nuanced. Who would have thought there's so much complexity in trying to get a campsite? Now, one of the things you brought up is the frequency of scans as well. And I know that you and the other Eric have done some work to optimized to make sure that you're not overloading the site? Because you potentially could, right, with an automated approach like this.
So this is a spot where I'm going to give you kind of the story as I understand it from the other Eric, because I'm not a developer and my technical depth is very, very shallow. There's no technical depth. But how Eric has explained it to me is that we're basically batching jobs. So when we're looking for campsites, let's say at Joshua Tree, we're looking for you, but we're also looking for everyone else who is looking for that spot or for availabilities at that park. So instead of you and hundreds or thousands of other people all manually reloading that page, we're doing it once and then reporting that information back. We've been really super careful about how frequently we do that, because we don't want to overwhelm anyone or any systems. We want to be an ally to parks. We want to get more people into campsites. We don't want to be a nuisance. But additionally, something that I didn't understand until surprisingly recently that Eric explained to me is that we are just pulling a specific piece of data from that booking system. Whereas when you go in, you're loading the page, you're loading all the images, all of the code that comes with that. So you're pulling in a much heavier load than we are. So I think, again, this is where the division in our kind of tiny little operation works out, where the other Eric handles all of that. So I'm kind of a dummy. I can't explain it to you very technically, but I know he's quite obsessed with doing things efficiently and respectfully so that we can be helpful and not hinder anything on those systems.
I think that's a great explanation, and if it was too technical, it would go right over my head as well. So I'm happy you're here.
Most technical things go right over my head. I have to Google a lot of stuff. So yeah.
I also want to call out, I like that we're referring to him colloquially as the other Eric. Now, you've mentioned kind of like some communication with parks. Are you working directly with parks at this point, or is that your ambition in the future to do so?
No, it's great that we can access the information that they're providing and help get more people into campsites and then generate more revenue for those parks, because every time a site is rebooked, there's more revenue for them and for the booking system as well, because there are the booking fees that are associated. The intricacies of working with that many institutions and bureaucracies is way more than a two-person operation could possibly handle. So we've kind of informally interacted with a couple of different parks groups and so on. We know that some of them recommend using our service. But realistically, we're two guys. It'd be really hard to go a lot further than that. Additionally, we scan a lot of different jurisdictions. So we currently scan national parks in the United States, most state parks, most provincial parks in Canada, and national parks in Canada. We've also started scanning some county parks, and we also scan for a number of backcountry permits. And sorry, I'm having a hard time speaking. There are a number of different booking systems out there. Some jurisdictions share the same booking system. So recreation.gov is a good example of many jurisdictions sharing one booking system. You also see Reserve America, Camus, US eDirect, Aspira. There are a number of different booking systems out there, but there are also many others that we don't integrate with. And so each of those, to figure out kind of the intricacies of working with them, and also some of the quirks that they have, is quite challenging. So I think we're doing a reasonably good job of covering a lot of the big parks that people are looking for. We're not able to scan all of them. Going much kind of further than that in terms of how we integrate with those systems, like a really common question we get is, will we be able to book through you as well at some point in the future? And it's like a universal no. Like we're just not going down that path. We like being a tiny operation, and this is keeping us really busy just to try to keep scans running as efficiently and accurately as we can just with the parks we already monitor.
Right. And now you've touched on, I think a really interesting point here is that there's so many different parks, park services, wilderness areas run by different government agencies. And it seems like that there are nuances both on the technical side for other Eric, and then on the, I don't, what you would call it, like the logistical every year. I know the how early they release permits changes, and how far in advance you can book kind of changes. Do you find that the two of you, that's what you're working on most of the time at this point, just trying to stay up to date?
It's a big part of it. Yeah. Like a large part of my work involves helping customers out. So helping folks just understand what they're facing. So a lot of what we've talked about today, I'll talk to folks about one-on-one when they call in going, it was opening morning and I couldn't get the site and I think bots did it. And can you make a bot for me that will do it too? And trying to explain it's not bots, and you're just dealing with a lot of people trying to book these sites. So sorry, I'm kind of digressing a bit, but that's a big part of it, is just helping people get to that spot where they understand what they're facing, maybe how to change their plans or optimize their scans so that it can see success. In terms of staying on top of these booking systems is, it's a pretty big job. So we have things like Canada's national parks were using Camus for booking. They then awarded US eDirect the contract. Then it turns out, I just learned today, that they apparently ended that contract and have returned to Camus, but are moving to a new version of Camus's booking system. So we'll have to move scanning over to monitor those accurately. This happens quite frequently. Florida State Park switched booking systems 2 years ago. There's always movement in that. But you're also seeing things like, if there's a forest fire, that might affect whether campsites are open. That gets incredibly complicated. How do you manage scans when you have a temporary park closure? What do you do in that situation? Because some people are going to be scanning for availabilities 8 months out or what have you. Sometimes there are glitches in booking systems where they'll momentarily show a site is available but is not available. There are sometimes spots where we have phantom campsites. I think one spot in Grand Teton that will come up as an availability that our members have been notified to, that doesn't show up on the booking system unless you find the back door to get to it, kind of. Like, there are all kinds of weird things out there, and we often have, like, this time of year, a single bug for one member that we spend a day trying to get to the bottom of. And, by the time the autumn rolls in, we have more time to develop features and add jurisdictions. But yeah, right now it's a lot of, this time of year, it's a lot of kind of hair pulling and trying to figure out why there's some odd glitch. Pandemic introduced a lot of fun stuff too, around like Crystal Cove cottages, where multiple parties could book one of the cottages. So it would show up in the system as available and unavailable randomly throughout the day, because booking policies during a pandemic changed. Like, just stuff like that often keeps us very busy.
The complexities will make anyone pull out their hair, and to the person who's listening, both Eric and I have obviously done that already. Yeah, we're already past that. I also want to bring up on another thing, and I saw you flagged it on your site. I know this is true of some areas, but not others, where you can book up to X number. I don't. Often it's 14 days in advance. So if like the campsite is available today, you can actually, like, a little insider tip is you can actually advance or book through kind of like the future for 2 weeks, which I think is frustrating to, my suspicion is that that's frustrating to people who haven't spent a lot of time in the outdoors, that they'll log on and see that almost all the campsites are booked immediately. And that's probably the reason why. So,
yeah, it's like, if you're going, again, if we go back to like the bot story of someone who's upset because they think that sites were booked up programmatically, excuse me, if you look at let's say, I'm trying to pick a jurisdiction. Let's say Ontario. What often happens there is that someone will, let's say I can't remember the booking window they're on. It's just not fresh in my mind. I think it's 6 months. I'm going to have this slightly inaccurate, but the gist of the story will be right. What Ontario has done traditionally is you would book, I believe, 5 to 6 months in advance, and you could book for this day, let's just say 6 months in advance, and up to 21 days into the unbookable territory. And then what would happen is people would grab that section, hold it for exactly a month, at which point they could go in and cancel any of those dates. And they would cancel any of the ones that they didn't want, holding on to like the key weekends or what have you. And so you'd see this flood of new availabilities come up exactly 1 month after those days became available, because that was when you could maximize how much you'd get back from your refund for canceling those dates. So it was really odd in Ontario. We'd see this flurry of activity in February, and it took us a while to understand that's what was happening. Now, I know people are going to do that, but I'd encourage you not to do it if you can, because it really screws things up for everyone. So what ends up happening the next day is people go in and realize out of a campground of, let's say, 600 campsites, only 4 are available, and those appear to be gone instantly, like in seconds, because that's all that's available there. But in truth, a lot of that supply is just being held. It's going to be released at some point in the future. So a couple of things to keep in mind is, yes, those will be canceled at some point, so you can snap those up at that time if you're lucky. Additionally, it's a good example of how policies should be changing on a park basis to prevent that from happening. In BC, if you book a stretch of time, you have to arrive for the first night of your reservation. You cannot augment to take out the arrival date. So, if that policy is in place and saying that people also can't transfer their campsite reservation, you get a lot less of people gaming the system in that way. So I know it's a workaround that people use, but it kind of amplifies the problem, and also the anxiety that surrounds booking a campsite, where people end up grabbing more than they really need because they think if they don't, they're going to be kind of screwed later and not be able to get anything.
That I'm happy that you went over that and you explained it way better than I could. I think it's your comment maybe at the top of this podcast that oftentimes getting a campsite is akin to getting Taylor Swift tickets holds true, and perhaps you've done a great job of demonstrating why that's true.
Cool.
Now, do you have strong thoughts on, should this system be altered? Could this system be unified in any way? It seems so complex and so one-off. I found I used to teach a how to climb Mount Whitney course, and I spent the majority of the time actually how to get a permit to climb Mount Whitney. And I find now I still have to relook it up every year just to refamiliarize myself with the process.
Yeah, it's a really complex and challenging problem. The reality is that an awful lot of campsites go unused because people just don't show up. And I think a big part of that is that, and I know we should get onto the unification of all this. I'll get onto that in a moment. But
sure.
I think the big one is that we have a lot of supply that goes unused. And it's because people are either booking so far in advance that they're forgetting by the time it rolls around, or they're treating it as a backup plan, or the consequences of not showing up aren't that great. So some people can be more casual about that. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe Wyoming has a 3 strikes and you're out approach. Again, I could be mistaken, but I believe it was Wyoming. So if you don't claim your campsite reservation 3 times, you can't book anymore. I think that's a great policy because, you might do it once or twice where something legit, you have a breakdown on the road or what have you, and you just can't make it. And that's understandable. But if you're repeatedly booking campsites and not showing up, it's quite unfair to everyone else involved. So I think that's a good policy. sorry, I'm going in all kinds of directions here. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that if through policy we can minimize the number of unused campgrounds, that would be a much more efficient way of creating more supply than by building more campgrounds, which is very expensive and hard to maintain as well for the parks. In terms of unifying all of this under one booking system or what have you, recreation.gov is a really great example of one place where that's come together quite a bit. I know a lot of people have frustrations with recreation.gov as well, but from everything we've seen, it seems like quite a successful product. And a lot of these booking systems are really quite strong booking system, or they're good from a usability standpoint. They function well. They do a lot of things really well. What we do have is both a shortage of available supply versus a great deal of demand. We also have local policies and approaches that are going to be really hard to reconcile. So in terms of unification of this, I think that would be very difficult. Some areas have locals booking policies where locals have access to those campgrounds earlier than people from out of state. Some areas will only allow you to book a campsite for a minimum of 7 nights. That if you don't book for 7 nights, you can't have that campsite reservation. There are a lot of areas that require on a long weekend that you have to book for a minimum of 3 nights. There's so many different things, and especially if you get onto the backcountry end of things, and I think this is what you experience with the Whitney permits, for example, it just gets way, way more complicated because now you have people on circuits and you have seasonal issues and you have maybe a late season where things couldn't come up on time. I think there are just so many variations in how certain areas are used and what local policy is that it would be very hard to get that all under one banner. Backcountry permits are the most challenging that we monitor because they are so quirky. Even on recreation.gov, they're handled in multiple different ways. So even if you could get these things under one system, there would still be many exceptions that you'd have to kind of work around. So I think this is going to be messy for a long time to come.
Wow. No, you've highlighted a ton of the different complexities, and I know that from those backcountry permits is that right. Sometimes they're focused on the entry permit, sometimes it's the exit permit. It just adding. I'm just thinking through all the complexities that you have to deal with. Now it's interesting that you have originally it sounds like we're not doing backcountry permits and have expanded into that. Yeah. Is there in terms of the future, are you hoping to expand into other areas, or what does the future look like for Hip Camp? Or sorry, for Campnab. I wanted to ask whoa, huge blunder there. I've got
for Hip Camp, it's quite lucrative, I believe, but for Camnab, not quite as lucrative. But, yeah.
I've got it in my notes to ask a Hip Camp question, and so cool. That was a Freudian slip right there.
No, that's cool. They both have camp in the name, but yes, I would rather be running Hip Camp than Campnab because it's a little bit bigger of an operation. Yeah, like our future is not that exciting. It's adding more jurisdictions and making the product work better. And yeah, I think as we've added jurisdictions, the job just gets harder because when there's a glitch somewhere there, it's integrating with one booking system is one thing, but each one of the new ones brings new things that you need to work with. So we moved slower than we did at the outset. It was easier to kind of move quickly at that time. We just added a batch of new parks, which was nice. I think we released a batch this morning, and we added, I think, 3 new states over the last couple of months. So we have been able to expand that offering. There are certain parks that we just get a lot of requests for, so we're trying to just kind of stay on top of what members want the most and then respond to that. In terms of the product itself, it's a lot of just trying to make it run more efficiently and just be more kind of intuitive to the users of it. I'm trying to find a good example of, let's say, unlock alerts, for example. California state parks and Florida state parks have, with certain campgrounds, but not all, or certain parks, but not all, they hold reservations for release at a set time. And that often is 8 a.m. So we had a member reach out, this is about a year ago, who said, I'd love it if you let me know that those are coming up so I don't have to go and check every morning at 8 a.m. So now we're able to send an unlock alert earlier that says, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., this is supposed to open up. In truth, they open up in a range of about a half an hour, but generally at about 8 tomorrow, this is going to open up. And we still have the standard alerts that we were sending in the past. So, we're really just trying to listen to what people are telling us they need and then try to fix any of those things and make it smoother for them. But we're not a unicorn. We're not a big venture capital backed company. We're a tiny operation with 2 people just trying to make a good product. So yeah, I wish I had a more exciting story for you than that, but it's really just trying to keep the product running smoothly.
No, it's incredibly exciting. And I think what strikes me is that you're clearly a customer first organization. And I really like that you take that feedback to heart. Is there, speaking of my previous slip, is there do your customers have an interest in transitioning or opening this product up to private campsites as well?
We've had a number of private campgrounds reach out to us asking about being listed on our service. So that's something that we've explored a little bit. It's really tough with this sort of a product to know exactly where to go with it. There's no limit to things that you could add to it. But I guess I bring up like a restaurant analogy. I'm always fearful of a restaurant that does like Greek cuisine, Italian cuisine, and Indian cuisine. Like where I grew up, you'd see a little bit more of that, where they do like 3 different distinct types of food under one roof. And you generally would know that you weren't going to get a great meal of any of those sorts in that restaurant. Conversely, there was a place across the street from our old office called Meat and Bread. And I don't have to tell you much about what they do. They made meat sandwiches. That was it. And they always had a line out the door. And I think part of that was that they stayed narrow enough that they knew that the product was really consistent all the time. Personally, I would love to build a parks booking system with a user interface that I found really intuitive, because I come from a design background and I'd just like to see it. Designers are always terrible for this. We always want things to look the way we want, thinking everyone else would love that, which probably wouldn't be the case. The truth of the matter is that's a much more complicated product than I think we're capable or ready of taking on at this point. Staying really narrow in this spot of like, how do we alert people to campsite cancellations, I think is a good place to be. We have added some reviews to our product so that you can now like, you could come in and say, this is what my experience at Joshua Tree was like. Here's what to look out for. Here are some photos. Because I think a lot of our members would like better like information on the places they're looking to camp. Once we move into, let's say, going to your original question, private campgrounds, they're kind of a bit of a different beast. And I worry that we might just take on a lot that we aren't able to really deliver on properly. So early on, I spoke with some owners of private campgrounds. They tend to function quite differently. Fewer people are looking for those with the same kind of destination in mind. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, because I'm sure there are a lot of private campgrounds that are amazing. The people are like, I love this one and I have to stay there. But what I experienced in chatting with a lot of campground owners was that they were more, like I said, in a really neat campground in Blue River when we were going to Myrtle Lake. And we stayed there not because of that campground, but rather because of its proximity to our canoe trip. When I stayed in Valemont at a little campground, Tet John Campground, I believe that was the name of it. We stayed because it was so close to Mount Robson, but we weren't going for the campground. We were going because really of how quickly it would get us to Mount Robson and this sort of thing. So I don't know that people are going to go looking for alerts the same way from those areas. Like Yosemite, people really want to stay within the park. I think that people who are looking more by, I need a campground close to, I don't know, Kelowna, BC, are probably going to go on Google and look for private ones and see who has availabilities. And a lot of those campgrounds are working on completely different booking systems. Some of them aren't even on a booking system. So what initially scared me away from working more with campgrounds was being up at Tetjon at that campground, asking what they were using for management. And I could see that he had a book, like he had like a year-long diary where he was writing in reservations like that. So once you're starting to look at those private campgrounds, part of the challenge is that they're in remote locations that may not even have internet access. I think with Starlink, that's going to change, but that's a whole other world of challenges that I don't know that we're ready to grapple with at this point.
That's a really interesting call out, though, the perspective of that totally makes sense now that I think about it. Those private campgrounds, or in general, when I go to a campground, I don't necessarily think of it as the campground, but I think of the destination, the mountain that I want to climb, or the rock climbing route, or the river adventure. Really interesting. Now, Eric, I wanted to thank you for coming on. It's been so great to have you on here. I'm a fan of what Camp Neb does, and it's really cool that you're trying to make sure all those unused campsites get filled and just kind of bring, empower the industry, if you will. Thanks for coming on.
No, thanks for having me. It's I hope I didn't carry on too much with the idiosyncrasies of campsite booking, but hopefully it's been useful to some of the folks listening in.
Absolutely, and good luck with all your adventures. I hope to have you on again.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.